Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about the book series Captain Underpants. It is a series of young reader novels about Captain Underpants, who is a superhero. It's an evil principal that whenever you snap your fingers around him, he turns into Captain Underpants and he has superpowers. He's pretty much like Superman. But anyways, Captain Underpants is a young readers novel series. It has a lot of pictures. Each book takes less than an hour to read, even the later books. That's why I didn't review the books or talk about the books individually. I just wanted to talk about the series as a whole, because you could read all 12 books in the series in the same amount of time that would take you to read like one Game of Thrones novel. Probably even less time than it would take you to read one Game of Thrones novel. But anyways, before I really get into those, let me talk about how Captain Underpants is kind of nostalgic to me and how I found out about it, sort of. I was a late bloomer in a lot of ways in life, and reading was one of those. I didn't know how to read in the third grade. In the third grade, all of my friends were reading, and I didn't know how to read at all. I was playing a lot of video games at the time, and every time a dialogue box would come up in a video game, I'd call my mom into my room and have her read it to me so I would know what was going on in the story or where I was supposed to go next in the video game. And one day she got sick of that, so she went to GameStop, and it was recently turned into GameStop at the time. This was like the late 90s or the early 2000s. And she went to GameStop and asked the clerk, what is a video game that has lots of reading in it? And the clerk told her Final Fantasy Legends 2 for the Game Boy. So she got that for me, and that game's alright. It's not a bad game. It's not a great game, but it's not a bad game either. And there's enough reading in there. If I was that clerk, I probably would have recommended like one of the mainline Final Fantasies, like 4 and 6, I think, were out by that time. Those probably would have been better games with more reading in them. But Final Fantasy Legends 2 was probably a good game for me to learn how to read on. Anyways, that's how I learned how to read. My mom gave me that game and said, I'm not going to read anymore for you, so you got to figure this shit out on your own. Because she was a bitch. But hey, it helped me read, so that's a good thing. I had all the basics down from school. Like, I knew how to sound out the letters and stuff. I just never was able to, like, actually, like, read. But, actually sitting down, playing that game, and sounding out the letters and kind of putting the words together is how I learned how to read. Where Captain Underpants fits into the story is that I was reading from video games, but Captain Underpants is kind of what made me enjoy novels and books. Up until that point, there were books in school that didn't really seem interesting to me. But Captain Underpants came around and I was like, whoa, this looks awesome. And it made me realize that books are more than just boring adult stuff, that there's actually some cool stuff in books. And I feel like that's true for a lot of people with Captain Underpants. I feel like a lot of young boys either learn to read from Captain Underpants or get interested in reading from Captain Underpants just because it's an interesting premise for boys. I'm sure girls like it too, but it's definitely targeted towards boys, I think. But yeah, Captain Underpants is a great book. I recently decided to read all of them because the movie's coming out, and there's 12 books in the series. When I was a kid, I believe I only read the first 5, so it was cool to go back. I bought all of them and reread them all, and they're just as fun for kids as they are for adults. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say like there's adult humor in there, but a lot of like the jokes and stuff take a lot of thinking, probably too much for a really young kid. So it's fun for adults too. I think I really enjoyed reading these books. But yeah, Captain Underpants is a wonderful series. I highly recommend it to everyone, kids and adults alike. The first 4 books are their own enclosed stories, and then I believe from book 5 through 12, it's all one continuous story with cliffhangers at the end of every book. And the first few books are really quick to read. You can read them in like 20 minutes, lots of pictures, very few words, very few pages. And as the series goes on, the books get longer, there's more words per page, there's more complex stories. The stories actually get really convoluted in a good way. And then the last 4 books, from 9 through 12, they're actually a lot thicker than the other books in the series. There's actually a surprising amount of depth to these books. The first few books are pretty shallow, but especially for kids' books, you read through them and there's a surprising amount of depth. I was actually pretty surprised by them. And the pictures are really fun, and the comedy in them and the humor is ingenious. A lot of it's like really well thought up comedy. These books are just fantastic, especially books 9, 10, and 11. The story gets really convoluted, but in a good way. And it also, Dave Pilkey is the author. I'm not sure if it's Dav or Dave because his name is just D-A-V, but I'm pretty sure it's Dave, so I'm going to call him Dave. But Dave Pilkey has a lot of like self-aware humor, and so he's writing these stories that involve lots of time travel and like dumb mechanics to like the story and plot devices that he kind of starts making fun of himself. But it keeps the story really interesting, and like it's good for an adult reader because you can kind of keep track of all the plot lines, I think. Something interesting about Captain Underpants is that it's not actually Captain Underpants is the title of the books, but Captain Underpants himself as a character isn't very interesting, and he's not really a major part of the books. The books are mostly about these kids named George and Harold, who created Captain Underpants from their evil, mean principal, and they're the main characters of the story. Captain Underpants really doesn't show any character development or depth to his character. George and Harold are the ones that really learn throughout the stories, and they're the ones that you grow with, you know. But these books are wonderful. I really like them. However, the final book was a little bit disappointing. I highly recommend you read all these books, but the last book is like, it felt uninspired. It felt like Dave Pilkey was just trying to end the series. It felt like another iteration instead of a great finale, you know, that was really epic. Book 12 is supposedly the last book in the series, but I really hope that it isn't. I hope that he comes back to it eventually. There's some loose ends that weren't tied up, and even though there's also some like very much finalizing stuff in the final book, it is a children's book with like time travel elements and all sorts of wacky plot devices that he could definitely continue the story. But it definitely felt like the final book. Or maybe he'll start a new story altogether, reboot the series or something like that, who knows. But it just, the final book kind of felt like it was rushed, like he was tired of Captain Underpants and he wanted to go on to his next series, which is Dog Man. I don't really have any interest in Dog Man because it's more of a graphic novel than like a novel with pictures. I'm not really looking for a graphic novel to read right now. And also, I like Captain Underpants. You know, those characters are specifically why I read the series. Dog Man's kind of I don't have any nostalgia for Dog Man, you know. But yeah, the final Captain Underpants book, it's like they created a new bad guy for the book, and he wasn't even like a super interesting bad guy. Like, it would have been better if they had brought back a bad guy from the series or done like a bad guy mashup, you know, like have all the villains come together and go up against Captain Underpants in some epic story. But instead it just felt like another iteration, but like the final iteration, you know. It's just kind of sad. I mean, even like in the book, they go into the future to find their future selves. George and Harold do, and they meet their future selves, and even that doesn't feel like super like epic, you know. I actually enjoyed when the book travels into the past and you meet past George and Harold when they're really young, and Harold has an afro. It's really funny. That was more interesting for me than seeing their future selves. And there was some controversy around that because it turns out Harold is gay. It was kind of like, it wasn't so subtle, but it wasn't like a huge focus point of the story. But that was kind of controversial, but it doesn't really bother anyone who's not homophobic. But yeah, the 12th book, it felt like another iteration. Like, it could have been a great epic finale to the series, and would have been a really great send-off. But to me, it felt more like a rushed ending to move on to his next book, Dog Man. So that's a little bit of a letdown. It's a satisfying ending. I mean, it wraps up pretty nicely, and the send-off is like pretty sweet. I mean, sweet as in like caring and nice. Like when you turn that final page, it's kind of sad, but I'm hoping that he writes more. Like I said, it's definitely possible in this world because of all the timeline travel elements and stuff like that, but I'm hoping that the movie does well. I'm hoping that the movie does well enough to inspire a sequel to the movie, maybe even a whole movie series. That would be hella tight. Or at least the movie will do well enough that Dave Pilkey will see that there's a still an audience for Captain Underpants that will inspire him to write another book in the series. But we'll see. Yeah, so Captain Underpants, great series. Two things I want to mention. They are expensive. I think I said this before. They're expensive, so try to get them in a bundle if you can, because they are kids' books and they won't take you very long to read, and they're kind of like $6 to $8 for a kid's book is kind of expensive. So try to get them in a bundle if you can. I know there's officially a bundle of the first 5 books. I don't think there's a bundle of all 12 books yet. I hope they do that in the future. But you can probably get those bundle of all 12 books from eBay or something like that. Also, I read book 9, 10, 11, and 12 as the UK versions because they haven't been released in paperback in the US yet. So I got paperback versions of the 9, 10, 11, 12 and the UK versions. And there's some slight differences. If you're reading in the US, I highly recommend reading the US books. And if you're reading in the UK, you should probably stick to the UK books, because transferring between them, like, one of the characters' names is changed, Dr. Diaper is changed to Dr. Nappy, and also some of the references in book 12, I felt like didn't really apply to me. I felt like they were UK references that I didn't understand. I could be wrong about that, but I feel like there were some subtle changes from the UK to the US version. So stick with your local version if you can. If you're okay with getting the hardcover versions and you live in the US, stick to the US. But I wanted all paperback, so I got the UK versions, and it worked. I mean, I don't feel like it detracted from the story at all. It just, I feel like there's some localization differences going on there. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching my video. Let me know what you think of Captain Underpants. Are you excited for the movie? And cool, leave a comment, subscribe, like. I will see you in the next one.